Mozart in the Jungle is an Amazon show based on a book by Blair Tyndall, a former New York freelance oboist. Many non-music friends of mine have asked me about it over the years, asking if it's as real as they seem to feel that it is. The short answer is, not really. I've been hesitant about doing an analysis on the show, so for now, I'm only going to look at the pilot episode. One thing that does need to be established before I get started is the era that the book takes place, as some of the scenes may relate to an old way of things. Blair grew up in North Carolina, moving to New York in 1978 to attend the Manhattan School of Music. This means events from the book are primarily from the 80s, while the show's music director is based on Gustavo Dudamel. Going off of Blair's time in New York, I would guess that part of the conductor is based on Zubin Mehta as well, who was the New York Philharmonic's music director from 1978 to 1991, and during his time there, he experimented with new ideas. This is also worth noting because other parts of the show have been updated, like the inclusion of cell phones. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the pilot episode. What happens behind the curtains at the symphony is just as captivating as what happens on stage. Brash new Maestro Rodrigo stirs things up and young oboist Haley hopes for her big chance. The episode opens with Haley teaching a lesson to a boy who isn't really paying attention, but is on his phone texting. And this is pretty accurate to real life. While I haven't had this happen to me personally, I have had friends who have taught lessons and had to deal with kids on their phone because they were playing a game, watching sports, whatever.
It's easier with the lips slightly wet. In through the nose, out through the mouth.
Maybe it's a reed instrument thing, but I breathe in through my mouth because I can get air in much faster. I know other brass teachers use PVC pipes or foam canisters with the bottom cut off, and they'll use that as an instrument to get students to breathe in with more air, trying to get that good breath. Not so much with breathing through the nose. But again, that could also be just because I'm a brass player. We transition to the concert hall, with real musicians from the Chelsea Symphony and the New Westchester Symphony accompanying Joshua Bell, a real soloing violinist, on the finale of the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. Malcolm McDowell, the conductor, and Saffron Burrows, Cynthia the cellist, are not musicians, but I'll give them a pass for being a little off. The woman opens up a candy wrapper, funny enough credited as the Crinkler, and oh man, is this true to life. I know many stories of loud candy wrappers during performances, but I'll save those for another day. Just know that this is very true, and Haley gives her an understanding look. A few things to note about the performance itself. The instrumentation is correct, so the lack of low brass is on Tchaikovsky, not the show. I haven't seen a soloist and a conductor exchange words after a performance like this, but it's not uncommon for musicians to say a few things to each other during the clapping. Usually it's something along the lines of, "Sounded great on that solo," but it isn't unheard of to, have some things said like, "What the hell happened in the third movement?" String players do indeed wave their bows up and down in place of clapping, but note they do not actually hit the stand. It's more of just a visual motion for clapping, not actually the noise of hitting the stand. Haley realizes she is late for something and bolts right before the new conductor is introduced, with the second movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony playing. In my experience, seeing several orchestras change music directors, I have not witnessed it happen like this. There has always been a 2-year process. The first year, the committee goes through applications and chooses finalists, and the second year has the finalists come in and conduct one concert. These were regional orchestras though, so perhaps full-time orchestras are a bit different.
At 12 years old, he was the youngest person to ever win the Mahler Award for Young Conductors.
That's a huge stretch and unrealistic. Had they said early 20s, that would make more sense. The Mahler conducting competition is a real thing, and you must be under the age of 35 to enter. The first winner in 2004 was Gustavo Dudamel at the age of 23, the youngest of the current winners.
At 23, he conducted at La Scala.
La Scala is one of the leading opera houses in the world, so good name drop there.
At 25, he lifted the Oslo Symphony out of bankruptcy and placed them amongst the finest on the world stage.
Well, the Oslo Symphony doesn't exist, but the Oslo Philharmonic does, and it was going into the bankrupt in the 1930s, but a deal with the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation saved it. So, Kind of a real event referenced, but changed up slightly for the show.
He has been courted by Boston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Munich.
The orchestras referenced here are real orchestras, but I believe they were chosen at random as I can't find any connection between them. After the concert, Cynthia is in a rush to get to another gig, and while you might think musicians just do one concert a day, it's not unheard of to do multiple. I've heard stories of opera musicians that are only needed for the opening and the conclusion of the show, so they're able to go and play the symphony concert across the way in the middle of the opera and be back in time to finish. I personally have accepted multiple gigs on the same day because the timing worked out. Sometimes the timing is fairly tight because one went long, so this has happened to me as well. The lighting after the concert suggests night, but to make sense that there's another gig afterwards, it's most likely a late afternoon at this point, after a matinee. All orchestras that I perform with that have a Sunday show, it's at 3 o'clock, so this scene would be taking place at about 5:30 at the latest. But still reasonable that a musical would have a performance later that night. I don't know why it's night outside. They should have just made it dusk, or even daylight would have been fine, but minor error. We move to the gig that Cynthia was going to, a fictional musical, Styx Oedipus Rocks. The scene here in the pit is pretty realistic. If anything, no one would help the lead musician aside from whispering or with hand signals to let them know where we are in the music.
If it wasn't for this pretty young lady, tonight would have been a disaster. I owe you.
How an oboist saved the day for a late cellist, I'm not sure how that could happen. Similar instruments may cover for those not there, like a horn playing a third trumpet part or something like that. Maybe there were major cello solos that were missing but Haley covered, but it most likely was just said as a way to get into Haley's pants, as referenced later.
You're welcome.
For what?
It's keeping Bernard out of your pants. I thought I knew every oboist in town. I'm Cynthia.
Cynthia Taylor, I know, you're second cello in the New York Symphony. It's a real honor.
You drink, I hope.
The scene shows what can happen to musicians on random gigs. You may play with somebody who notices you and wants to play with you more, and they end up helping you out. How they notice you depends on the gig. Was there some difficult solo? Was there a major problem that you're able to resolve? Sometimes it would just be a job that you were hired for last second, and they were impressed at how well you're able to sight read the music. The next scene is a reception with the new conductor, and through dialogue is brought to light that Rodrigo has been brought in to test out new ideas, just like Zubin Mehta I mentioned at the beginning.
Our coming season will feature some of the surprising highlights, such as turning off the house lights and playing selected pieces in complete darkness.
I haven't heard of any concerts being done in complete darkness, though. There's an altercation between the conductors, but nothing really is out of the ordinary. The issues Rodrigo heard are certainly possible.
And then the horns came a bar late, which completely threw off the clarinet, and we weren't able to perceive Tchaikovsky's desired dynamic shift from bars 27 to 34.
Are not referencing the violin concerto, and it's not said what other pieces were performed on that same concert. Back to Cynthia and Haley, they are grabbing drinks at the bar, and the server buys rounds for them.
This round's gonna be on me.
Well, thank you.
Cynthia talks about stereotypes of sexual partners that are musicians, and there are plenty of jokes out there, so take the scene however you like. Just remember that everyone is different and that what is said may not hold true to your personal experience. Thankfully, nothing is said about horn players, so I'm totally fine there.
Kind of fun for about 10 minutes.
Shifting to the limo ride, some music business is talked about.
This is a $350,000 cello.
Can a cello be worth $350,000? Absolutely. We'd mentioned Joshua Bell earlier, and his violin is priced at about $4 million.
He's making cuts. Woodwinds and brass. For now.
The union will have something to say about that.
The musicians' union stepping in to prevent certain changes is a real thing. Cuts to the woodwinds and brass first does seem weird though, unless they have more than standard on payroll. For example, the horn section consists of 4 players, but some orchestras have a full-time assistant and possibly a full-time associate principal. Usually that position goes to the third horn if it's not its own position. So maybe it's those positions that were cut, but it was never really stated, and I'm not sure what this could actually be referencing from the late 70s, early 80s.
Let's get these
The party that Haley goes to at her place starts out with a pun, Bizet. There's the composer, B-I-Z-E-T, and of course the word busy. The music is from Act 2 of the opera Carmen by, well, you guessed it, Bizet.
There's a flutist out here, and he wants to play you in Showdown.
The drinking game they play, Showdown, yeah, I bet it's real somewhere, but not something I've ever participated in. I'm fairly solid on horn rep, but I'm thinking the credits on the other pieces used here. The first flute solo, which is not in the credits.
This is the piano arrangement.
It doesn't matter.
And is not being read off the piano arrangement, is from the fourth movement of Dvorak's 8th Symphony, and while blurry, definitely looks like the correct music was on set. So why are they mentioning that he's reading off of the piano arrangement? Honestly, what difference would that make? Especially in that section of Dvorak 8, it's literally just a flute solo. It would be easy to read it off of the piano arrangement. So I guess this was just added to make it sound more impressive, but as an instrumentalist, flute, horn, clarinet, doesn't matter. If you're reading the piano arrangement, you're going to read one line. He plays this section twice, and yeah, it's repeated in the original, but then plays 2 more bars and then just ends in the middle of the phrase? That's odd.
I feel like all I spend my time doing is like figuring out how to make money and then figuring out how to be a good roommate and good daughter, and like none of it is about the art.
This quote is very real. As freelancers, not enough money is confirmed. One year I might get 10 calls from one location, the next I only get 2. The struggle is real. Your focus can tend to be on that, and you end up lacking in many other areas of your life. Haley wakes up late for Duncan's recital and is hungover. But that's what you get for what happens the night before. She gets a call from Cynthia about a last-second auditions at the hall, kisses Duncan on the cheek before encouraging her to go, and she bolts. I wonder what would happen if I kissed one of my students on the cheek today. Huh. Anyway, so this audition. Alright, here we go. First of all, musicians are not called the morning of, and I highly doubt that would have been true in the 80s. More realistically, which I still don't believe, is this was probably set up with a week's notice, and an audition like that, you would drop whatever you were doing to be there. I'm not sure why Cynthia was being secretive about it. It just seems really odd to me. There are the occasions that only the conductor and the assistant would be on the panel, but for a full-time orchestra like this, there would most certainly be a panel of all principal winds and others. To make it more realistic, just put a panel there, just bodies in the seats, writing on notepads, and it would be closer to the real thing. Blair did respond to this criticism, but again, bodies in the seats, easy fix, makes it more realistic. While this audition's going on, Haley is racing to the hall while we listen to Mendelssohn 4. And she is making a read on the bike taxi? Okay. This is something that could happen, but very much stretched. If a last-minute read needs to be done, they might do it in the back seat of a taxi, but not on something as unstable as this. Yes, it does happen, but boy did they go to the extreme on this one. So Haley gets to the hall late and just can walk right out on stage? Usually you'd have to go through some kind of personnel manager or some kind of security to get that far, but I guess with them on a lunch break, the security is a bit relaxed and they could just walk out? I'm curious what really happened here to Blair, because this just seems odd. So she pulls out her oboe, finds Alex's phone number and scarf, and starts playing the Mozart Concerto. Rodrigo hears it, seems to like it, and the rest of the orchestra joins in to play us out into the credits.
It's over, sir.
There is so much here to talk about that I'm sure I missed something, but hopefully provided enough insight to the show that this is based on a true story. All is kind of true, but very much stretched. So what are your thoughts on the show? Do you like it? Do you hate it? But that's been my musical analysis into the pilot episode of Mozart in the Jungle. Until next time.